Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another faction guide for Enlisted. This time we're going to be going over the Soviets. If you haven't already, be sure to check out the other two guides I've already put up for both the Axis and the Allies, and be sure to sub to the channel for when I eventually get around to the Japanese and any other future factions added to the game. If you guys haven't seen one of these guides before, the goal is to give you like an overview of each tier of the faction, highlighting the best weapons and the best vehicles so you don't end up wasting all of your hard-earned silver on stuff you won't actually use. Remember that this video is meant to be a rough outline, not like a set-in-stone rulebook. If you find a certain weapon interesting and fun to use that I didn't mention, then by all means keep using it. Without anything else guys, let's jump into it, starting with some of the overall strengths and the weaknesses of the Soviets. The Soviets are arguably the strongest faction in all of Enlisted. They have a diverse, powerful roster that's lacking in very, very few areas, and the ones they are lacking in don't really matter much. Something Russian bias, but whatever. The Soviets especially shine in their assaulter weapons, like the PPS-43 and the PPS-H-41, Fedorov, and AS-44 later on in BR-5. If you're the type of player that's looking for strong ground-based combat, focusing on fully automatic, aggressive, close-quarters guns, then the Soviets are going to be the faction for you, and they're going to be an absolute dream. The biggest weakness of the Soviets is their top-of-the-line vehicle play. Vehicles like the IS-2, while being very powerful when played correctly, can be very awkward to use for a lot of players if they're not used to it. And their air roster also lacks the sheer firepower of planes like the P-47, making it difficult to just ground and pound the big German tanks like the King Tiger. And on the flip side, their fighter roster has a huge problem with ammo capacity. But either way, let's jump into each tier, starting off with Tier 1. Tier 1 Soviets are arguably the weakest point for the entire faction, which is actually great for us, because it's the tier that we're going to be spending the least amount of time in. Now your first unlock should absolutely be the PTR-41. This thing is best described as trash, but having some sort of anti-tank is better than having no anti-tank at all. Your best bet with this thing, guys, is going to be to target the tracks of enemy vehicles and then either finish them off with an explosive pack or kill them as they have to get out and repair. Lightly armored tanks like the Panzer II or maybe the Puma can be knocked out with some very accurate fire into the ammo racks, but it's still going to be pretty inconsistent with the only single round that you can load into the PTRD at one time. After we've got the PTRD, we're going to want to push for the Mosin M1938 carbine towards the rifles. This is our first engineer squad, which is the most important squad in Enlisted, allowing you to build fortifications like the rally point, anti-tank guns, and anti-air guns. Make sure to slot this squad in and start leveling it up as soon as possible. As for your mainline rifles, our starting Mosin carbine is utter trash. It has low damage and a low rate of fire. We're going to want to upgrade this as soon as possible. Our two primary choices are the Mosin M1938 carbine that we just unlocked and the Mosin Dragoon. The carbine trades raw damage for rate of fire, while the Dragoon offers higher damage at a lower rate of fire. Pick whichever rifle you personally find more comfortable to use, but be sure to not go too overboard with buying them. We're going to be trading them in for a Winchester later on in Tier 2. Tier 1 is also a weak point for the Soviet assaulter weapons. The PPD-34 is fine and is probably better than a lot of the starting assaulter weapons, but it has a low magazine capacity and it's going to burn through all of your ammo very quickly. The Tosby, on the other hand, is pretty much exactly what you'd expect a double-barrel hunting shotgun to be in World War II, which is not very good, but very fun. Grab a couple of whichever one that you want to use, but don't go overboard again. We'll be swapping these out for better SMGs very shortly once we get to Tier 2. And finally, we move on to tanks and planes in Tier 1. The BT-7 is a great little tank, and War Thunder veterans will know just how deadly its speed can be. Make sure to stay on the outskirts of the map and use your speed to keep moving. The 45mm cannon will be a mainstay of the Soviet tanks for quite some time, so get used to its smaller splash but good rate of fire, and be sure to learn the weak points of all the different German tanks. As for planes, the starting biplane is surprisingly good with its wing-mounted rockets, which I've personally used to take out tanks as big as Tigers. And anyone worth their weight, though, is going to be able to pick you out of the air very easily, so the Yak-1 is a better bet. It's light, quick, and agile, so it's a great little plane and will take you pretty far through the BRs. Moving on to Tier 2, guys, we're going to be getting a huge amount of upgrades. Battle Rating 2 and Tier 2 for the Soviets is incredibly strong. The PPS 42 comes in with a new shiny Assaulter squad, giving you access to another squad capable of using SMGs, as well as being able to bring more engineers and anti-tank soldiers in that squad. And the PPS itself is also a very strong weapon. If you're willing to wait just a little bit, the PPS 43 is a small upgrade over the 42 with about an extra 100 rounds per minute or so. Whichever you decide on, be sure to outfit your squads with these. They're going to be a mainstay for quite some time. We also are going to gain access to the Winchester 1895 rifle for some rootin' tootin' rusky action. The Winchester is hands down the best bolt action rifle, or I guess a lever action rifle, in its battle rating, and arguably in the entire game, and it's not close at all. It hits hard, it's incredibly accurate, has a high rate of fire, and guys, it's damn cool, let me tell you. This is a great gun to pick up regardless of your playstyle, and it won't be going away anytime soon. We also get access to our first MG squad. Now, the Madsen is probably one of, if not the weakest MG in all of Enlisted, and in my opinion, just isn't really worth your time or silver. In my opinion, guys, hold off on this squad for later when you unlock better LMGs down the line. Our AT weapons are going to get some love here as well. The PTRS is just a semi-auto version of the PTRD that you've been using, and it's fine. It's nothing to write home about, guys, but with some practice, it can be a good tool for knocking out enemy tanks, as well as the occasional infantry. After all, guys, if it's good enough for a tank, it's good enough for a person. After the PTRS, we'll be able to grab the M1 bazooka and the Gaz APC. The bazooka is easy to use, and certainly capable of taking out any tank at its BR. Now, if you struggle with the PTRS, you're going to want to pick up the M1 bazooka, but if you can get by with the PTRS and just using explosive packs, skip out on the M1 and save the silver. Now, the Gaz is an APC, the first and only of its kind in the tech tree. APCs are basically mobile rally points, allowing you to spawn your team onto the APC wherever you place it. You're definitely going to want either this or an engineer squad in your lineup at all times. And finally, we get back to vehicles. The T-50 is going to be a staple of this BR. It's got our faithful 45mm that we're so used to, but this time with a pair of MGs, some speed, and more than just paper mache for armor. If you enjoy tanking but have been frustrated by the BT-7's lack of armor, then make sure to grab this early on in the tier to take out enemy armor and get into some fun tank duels. After the T-50, we have the T-28 and the T-28E. Now, I very rarely recommend foldered vehicles and weapons during these videos, but this is an exception. The T-28 itself isn't a huge upgrade over the T-50. It's a massive target and is very easy to take out. But the T-28E comes with some additional armor on the front that really ramps up the power of the vehicle. If you plan on sticking around Tier 2 for a while and grinding up through Tier 3 by using Tier 2 gear and playing in Tier 2, make sure to grab the T-28E and get used to it. Planes, on the other hand, there's not really much to write home about here, guys. The P-40E, though again behind a folder, is probably the best of the bunch. The IL-2 1941 is a decent attack plane, but the RBS-82 rockets I personally find to be pretty lackluster, and its bomb payload is really light compared to other planes at its BR, like the Stuka. Halfway home and on to Tier 3. For rifles, guys, you've got a choice. You can stick with the Winchester that you've been using and use it all through Tier 3 until you can get the SVT-40, or you can jump straight into the SVT-38 now. The SVT-38 is very similar to the 40, but it does have lower damage, which is an incredibly important stat on semi-automatic rifles. Silver-wise, they're the same cost, but you don't want to dump tons of silver on getting the SVT-38 and then also have to buy the SVT-40 later on. You're just going to want to get one or the other. Personally, guys, I recommend sticking with the Winchester. It's just such a good rifle, and I think that you can hold off and use it until you can get the SVT-40 in Tier 4. We've also now got a decent LMG, the DP-27. Though it's still not the best, it's serviceable, it's fine. I recommend grabbing a few of these and start leveling up your gunner squad now. You'll thank me later when you get to the late Soviet LMGs. We also get the famous PPSH-41. But unfortunately, it's the box mag variant, which makes it only a small-ish upgrade over the PPS-43. If you've been using the 42, it's probably worth grabbing some of these. But if you've upgraded to the PPS 43, and certainly if you've upgraded the PPS 43s themselves, I'd say skip it and just wait for the drum mag later on. As for heavy weapons, these are easy. A flamethrower, like the other tier 3 flamethrowers, is not a great one. Skip it and use the Rox 3 flamethrower later on in tier 4. The Panzerfaust 60, though, boy oh boy, guys, the days of the PTRS are over. These Panzerfaust will be your AT for the rest of the game and the grind, so make sure to grab them now. You might end up upgrading them later on to Panzerfaust 100, but it's by no means necessary in any way. And also, by the way, in case you're wondering why the Panzerfaust is in the Soviet tree despite being a German weapon, the historical context is that during the German retreat out of Russia, the Soviets ended up capturing like thousands and thousands of Panzerfausts. The more you know. More tanks and more planes. The famous T-34 is here in tier 3, giving you the first truly good tank for the Soviets. And guys, it's all up here from here. A good gun, good armor, good speed, and a nice healthy dose of Russian bias makes the T-34 a big upgrade over the previous vehicles that you've been using. While you still won't be able to go toe-to-toe with the big cats like the Tiger and Panther in the event of an up tier, you'll still at least have a fighting chance against them, and you'll certainly be dominating anyone in a down tier. Basically, every plane in this tier sucks, though, with the exception of the IL-2 and the IL-2M. If you're just looking to ground pound with a plane, just grab the IL-2M, and then you don't really ever have to look at the air tree again. Easy peasy, tier 3's over. It was quick, and here we are at tier 4. Like I mentioned before, guys, the SVT-40 is here. The SVT-40 is personally my favorite semi-auto rifle in the entire game. It's got great sights, good damage, great magazine capacity, and is easy to use, making it a formidable weapon to say the least. If you skipped over the 38, you'll want to spend all of that saved silver on getting the SVT-40. Now for your Assaulter boys, we get our first drum mag. Unfortunately, it's on an older gun, but hey, beggars can't be choosers, right? The PPD-34 is a nice upgrade from whatever you're using, but it's by no means required. Like I said earlier in the video, guys, the PPS-43 is an amazing gun, and it can carry you all the way until BR5. And MGs are not much different here either. DPM is just a copy of the DP-27, but with some small stat changes, so go ahead and skip that. The DT-29, while being better overall, still really isn't anything particularly amazing. Maybe pick some DTs up if you're looking for some MG gameplay and you're enjoying it, but nothing here is really that noteworthy or necessary. Again, the same can be said for heavy weapons. The Panzerfaust 100 does give some additional pin over the 60, and some people think it's easier to use, but not really by enough to warrant breaking the bank just to get them. The Rox 3 is, however, an upgrade over the previous flamethrower, and even with flamethrowers being a far cry from their previous throne, it's still a powerful tool for room clearing if you find that your assault weapons aren't quite up to snuff. The KV-1, despite being tier 4, is a battle rating 3 vehicle, meaning you can bring this into down-tiered matches and be basically invincible. It's kind of nuts, actually. The ZIS-5 variant, however, is BR4 and is utterly worthless and will just get completely eaten alive by Panzers, Panthers, and Tigers, oh my. Don't use this under any circumstances.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would. But I legally can't. But I've considered it.
Everyone's favorite T-34 just got even bigger with the bigger gun and more armor, making it able to properly engage both Tigers and Panthers, albeit still at a small disadvantage. The D5T variant has a different cannon, which, if I'm being honest, guys, I don't actually know what the differences are. I'm sure someone with a PhD in War Thunder can go in the comments and answer. The big difference here is that the D5T does have one less crew, so be sure to swap into the standard T-3485 when you unlock it. And now, finally, we're in Tier 5. There are huge upgrades here across the board. Going down the line, the AVS-36 can be totally skipped in favor of the AVT-40. While the AVS isn't a bad gun by any means, the AVT-40 just kind of outclasses it in every way, and there's no reason to spend a bunch of silver on the AVS when we're going to be getting the AVT-40 anyway. The AVT itself is a powerhouse select fire weapon that will shred anyone who's able to use it and learn it properly. It's incredibly important to note that the AVT basically requires you to have the vertical recoil reduction perk to work in any serious capacity. So make sure you guys have this on all of your soldiers you plan to use the AVT with. This is the top of the line though, so make sure to grab as many of these AVTs as you need. There's nothing after this. Assaulter weapons up next, and there's a lot of them. PPD-40 can be safely skipped. It's a speed bump. The PPSH-41, however, brings us our beautiful, glorious SMG and all its magnificent firepower with the drum mag to boot. This is the de facto room-clearing king in all of Enlisted, and it's fantastic and fun to use. Hold left click and let the 1000 RPM do the rest. But that's not all, guys. Next up is the Fedorov, which is currently one of the best weapons in all of Enlisted. It won't clear rooms as effectively as the PPSH necessarily will, but it will shred enemies with its high hit power, and it'll do it at much longer ranges. Just like the AVT, be sure to use this with vertical recoil reduction or you're going to have a bad time. And last but certainly not least is the AS-44, which is basically a better STG. I'm serious, like if you look at the stats, the STG just is slightly worse in every stat compared to the AS-44. It's kind of funny, actually. Really, though, it's the middle ground between the PPSH and the Fedorov. Most of the AS-44 stats land somewhere between the two, so if you can't decide between having longer range and having close range firepower, this is what you're going to want to go with. But between these three assaulter weapons, there's really no wrong choice. Use whichever one you find to be the most enjoyable. Whew, that was a lot, and BR5 is just starting, guys. MGs get a huge upgrade here too. The RD-44 is beyond broken, since it's the only MG, to my knowledge, that has no movement penalty for some reason, despite having a 100-round magazine to go with it. Sure, it has lower damage than other MGs, but who cares when you can sprint around like a madman? This is a fantastic pickup for anyone looking to complement more aggressive assaulter gameplay with some aggressive MG gameplay as well. The Maxim Tokarev, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. Slow, cumbersome, and it hits like an absolute truck. The Maxim is much better on the defensive when compared to the RD-44, since you'll take a massive movement speed penalty while you're lugging it around. For tanks, there's only two real upgrades here. The Su-85 is just a turretless T-34-85, and the IS-1 is just a T-34 with different armor. What we're really looking for here, guys, is the IS-2. Named after the Big Papa of the Soviet Union himself, the IS-2 is certainly compensating for something given its massive 122mm cannon. This thing is going to absolutely nuke anything within a 6-mile radius of impact of its HE, and any kind of penetration into an enemy tank will leave it a smoldering wreck. Guys, the HE on this thing is so powerful that oftentimes you can just sling an HE shell into an enemy tank and knock it out from the pure concussive force alone. And this happened a lot during the war. The 1944 variant comes with some anti-heat cages around the turret, affectionately called cope cages, since they'll do basically nothing to actually stop any rounds, but they look kind of nice. But the IS-2 1944 does solve some other armor issues, as well as giving you a nice 50 cal Dishka on top to gun down anyone who is dumb enough to get close. However, both IS-2s suffer from unbelievably massive reload times, sitting at about 27 seconds, I believe, without the reload speed perk. It goes without saying that you'll definitely want to have both the loader shell swap perk as well as the reload speed perk for your loaders in the IS-2. Whew! And that's all, guys. Or at least that's everything that we have in the game at the time of this video. Hopefully this gives you all a bit of insight into the Soviet tree and will save you guys a little bit of silver. If it did, be sure to like and subscribe, since it does help me out so much, and you'll be updated whenever any of these new tips, tricks, gameplay, and videos come out. And I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.